Good morning. I'm Vikas Mehta from University of Cincinnati from the School of Planning. I'm going to talk about this, but maybe not this. We'll find out in a little bit. So, neighborhood business streets are not new to me. I've been working around streets for 15 years, but not particularly with any attention to e-commerce. About 4.5 years ago, I got to Cincinnati and found that much like any other city, every city calls itself a city of neighborhoods. And as a foreigner, well, I've been here 20 some years now, but as a foreigner, I think, what is going on? I lived in Baltimore, lived in Tampa, lived in Cambridge. Now I come to Cincinnati, and every city calls itself a city of neighborhoods. Well, either if that's true, then it's why make a big deal out of it? And if it's not true, then maybe it's not true for some cities, or not as true. It certainly wasn't as true for Tampa, which also said we are a city of neighborhoods, which probably had 6 handful of recognizable, unique neighborhoods. Everything else looked the same. But Cincinnati was actually quite different. This was a place that had 52 neighborhoods, which is again interesting in itself. We are working on a deck of cards, 52 cards for the city, side project. But when I looked at the city, traveled around the city, got to know the place, it genuinely was a city, at least had 25 to 30 really, really unique neighborhoods. Morphologically, in terms of the people, the institutions in there, the way the people interacted. And so I said, okay, I think I kind of buy this narrative in Cincinnati more than other places, at least where I lived. And it's also because Cincinnati it's a pre-Chicago city. It was a city before Chicago was a city. It used to be a town, so that tells you something about it. Anyway, so we started to do a research on neighborhood business districts, because out of the 52 neighborhoods, 32 still have an NBD with very, very small retail parcels that are not alive and well, but they are zoned that way. They can be brought to life quite easily. So we looked at about 22 of those that were better than others, and began to find some very interesting things around retail. So from that, this interest grew in trying to understand what the business owners have to say about this. So these are some simple questions about how do they survive and what are their main advantages from the business owner's perspective. I went back, and that's why I was trying to make this point yesterday, trying to connect to what Emily was talking about, quality of life, sense of place, that retail still is defined as the sale of goods to the public in relatively small quantities for use and consumption rather than for resale. So this idea of, large boxes of things and toilet paper is okay, it's retail, but not in the, at least not by the definition of the old dictionary. So we did this very simple, not very sophisticated method. We interviewed business owners. We reached out to them through email, just walking by and saying, hey, what is the slow time for you? When can we talk to you? My graduate student would go and do that, and then I would follow up with a handful to just come back and say, hey, we had my student talk to you, and then they would probably, if they had time, they would talk back to me a little bit more. And then we looked at their websites after, and some had websites, some did not, some had Facebook presence, and we tried to do a thematic analysis for all the content. You don't have to read this, but it's a boring set of questions that we came up with. How long have you been here? How did you select this location? Has it changed? What do you think is your main advantage? How do you play that up? So on and so forth. We did not particularly ask them about the economics. So we did not go and ask them about rent. How much do you pay? All of that. But we tried to get those or tease those out for those that were chatty. Say, okay, what's going on? How do you manage to be here? And those were kind of linked under the challenges and tactics and so on and so forth. So compared to most of the presentations that we've heard and that we will probably hear, this is the tiniest sample. It's 21 business owners so far. We're going to do more. But importantly, they're not food or beverage businesses, except for one wine and beer shop that sells wine and beer, but also has a place where he does this gathering on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So except for that, everything else we figured, hey, you know, if you have good coffee, you can probably survive. If you have a good menu, you'll hang out. But what about the others, the toys and hobbies and all of the other stores here? So that made the task a little harder, because you take out the food and beverage places, then you're in many neighborhoods left with nothing. You may be left with a corner store, as was mentioned yesterday, which is actually kind of a place we want to survey, but we said no, let's just look at other retail where apparently the impact from e-commerce is going to be more relevant, because you can buy any of that over e-commerce. So here's really quick a map of Cincinnati, and the red dots that you see with the black pattern, it's sort of the figure ground of the urban form, and these are all the NBDs. There are about 32 of them scattered around the city. So the fabric is fantastic. This place can serve, as part of the other study, we looked at, this could serve about 52% of the population within, this is through network analysis, up and down, walking on sidewalks within half a mile. You can serve 52% of the city in half a mile of walking if you revive these NBDs that exist today. You don't have to really do very much. That's not the subject of this. So 52 neighborhoods, 32 have NBDs. We'd studied 22 earlier. 3 are the ones that we interviewed merchants from. So as part of this other study, we found this really, really disparate way that each of those 22 was able to provide for, and these colors actually represent food and beverages, they represent services, they represent 5 things which I'll show you later. But it's a big disparity between what neighborhood can provide how much and how well. So it's a radar chart. The more of this means it's doing better on that versus the other. And this was a fun project just to go around the city to doing that. Anyway, just a sort of a zoomed in view of what these places might look like for those of you interested in the sort of textural quality of this place in terms of its urban form. If you can see, the dark black footprint around this is a quarter mile walking through network analysis, and the lighter gray tier from there is a half mile. So this is where Conrad lives, and that's where I live. So we are both in the catchment of this. It's very, very personal stuff. So just no disclosure there around that. These places are actually really wonderful places. These are places that are charming, they are engaged, they are involved. Not the 22, but many of them are. And the 3 that we studied merchants from are like that. People are really, really about community. They care. They are diverse places. They're affluent generally. This place has the advantage of being near the campus. So there is a very good flow of students that can actually support some of the retail and also engage in the vibrancy here. Our School of Design, School of Planning, Architecture students are into this stuff. They do show windows, they'll decorate stuff, and they do a high quality, this whole artists get involved in painting this that stays every 3 months, a year, so on and so forth. So this is a very poor way of me trying to typify these. I have to work on this. What are these stores? They're destination stores. They're specialized. They're exclusive, many of them, but some of them are also specifically for community gathering. So we move on. The websites these guys have are very bad for many of them or most of them. They're really terrible. The businesses are wonderful, most of these, but the websites are pretty terrible. But some are actually pretty sophisticated, and pretty well done. So you have that this change in this. So coming back to the strategies, we asked them and we tried to categorize these. So of course location is big, and they talk about it when they tell us why they located where, and they also put this narrative often on their website. So here's our man, the Ludlow Wines guy, who says, we are 1 block away from the Esquire Theater. This is a theater with, within like 1.5 minutes of walking from Conrad's place to the best movies, independent movies, right there. With a little plaza on the opposite side, and so on and so on. And this is, I haven't shown it here, but the history-making rock music venue, the Ludlow Garage. So they're trying to talk about where they are. It's very important to them, because it's not just I'm a shop on the main street, I am located in something really important. This is an example from Hyde Park. They're at the square, so they talk about that. So these places might be affluent. Clifton is particularly diverse, but Clifton is particularly tolerant. And that's again very important to us as planners, designers, talking about these things, because this is a place where all kind of stuff happens. Skateboarders can take over an area and it's okay. You can sleep on the bench, nobody's going to take you away. Notice that the benches do not have division, and if they do, it's okay. You can sleep there. You can panhandle, you can do whatever, you can play trumpet really bad on the plaza, it doesn't matter. Everything is possible. So this was the part of the other study, but I'm not going to go into that. The idea that many of these things are important to people who live there, and these places think about this. These businesses think about collaboration and not competition. Again, anecdotally we know that, but they really talked about it well, that we work with this and the other, and we don't want to compete with them. The other strategy, which probably needs a better word, is what I call combining. So to sell their goods, they combine with a service that is not available online. So this guy has a notary service here, to which you go there, you get yourself a notary stamp, and you come out with a $12 bottle of wine. And when my student went there, she didn't know this shop, so she went there and she said, I went there and the first thing he did was he poured me a glass of wine. And I interviewed him, and then I bought a bottle. And she said, there's no way I could have not bought this bottle, because it was so much part of this thing that, anyway, and in the meanwhile, a lady came who sat there and she was knitting. She did not drink wine while my student was doing the interview. She did not buy wine. You just come there, you sit and you hang out and you go away. It's perfectly fine. He will have voter registration forms in there. He will have other things in there. It's all part of the story of combining. But there are others that will combine style advising, so, to people as part of a service of selling jewelry and apparel and so on and so forth. They're very community engaged, and I'll talk about that later. They want to be doing things for people. They want to customize their goods, services to the community. They also do digital advertising, many of them, through some e-presence, images and promos, and crowdsourcing. One of the business owners we interviewed had something that I had never heard of before. She will take a photograph of a particular jewelry or artifact that she can source. She puts it on Instagram and says, I'll give you $10 or something like that if you tell me whether I should buy this or not. Should I bring this to my store or not? And she showed us over 4,000 responses for one item that tells her, oh yeah, that they said she should get it, so she procures it. So she builds her inventory using Instagram and a way of sort of getting people into it, getting involved. It's an advertising, but it's also a very, very sort of safe way to build your inventory, because someone out of the 4,000 will buy it. Partnerships and collaborations is the other strategy, which is different from combining. So the custom furniture place partners with the interior decoration store. So you get that, but you also have to think about your room that you're designing and decorating. This is the best. The hardware store in our neighborhood has the baker who puts stuff there every few days of the week, because many years ago the main grocery store closed, but the baker was the favorite of the neighborhood, and so Brian said, hey, we have space, set up your stuff here. So you go to buy bread, fresh bread at the hardware store. The fruit vegetables guy, John, he sets up at the wine shop. So you go there, buy watermelons at the wine shop on Thursday and Friday. So these are like anecdotal things, they're small things, but this is how it is working for them. The specialized stationery shop that survives because they are doing stationery for weddings has tied up with a printing guy who does inexpensive cards and all of that, but they sustain the printer because they send the clientele there. So these partnerships and collaborations. The bookshop in another neighborhood collaborates with area schools and nonprofits as well. And finally, these guys talked really big about this, adjusting their inventory and customer needs quicker than big box and e-store. And I don't know how that works, but that's what some of them claimed. And finally, I think appearance and design, they pay a lot of attention to how this place will look like. Do not miss Frida Kahlo's mural done on the sidewalk, paid by the jeweler who sources all this stuff from South America and Mexico and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting narrative that is actually playing out quite differently. So they say their advantages are personal relationships, friendliness, localness, place knowledge, storytelling, uniqueness, high quality, and product, service, and knowledge. But the most important thing, or one of the most important thing that comes across from what we gathered from the interviews and the websites are how does the store and the store owner project themselves? What is the image? And I'd like you to read at least one or two of these, because it's quite critical, because it's really not about retail, or it's not about the commerce in this case. Undeniable. It's like, how do you focal point of the community? They talk about the importance of reading and conversation and real world experience. They talk about the analog brain. People are talking very sophisticated conversations here. This is a place for families to get together. Simple philosophy of satisfying customers with quality and value. Striving for excellence in ethical sourcing and crafting, and our mission is to share our heritage without exploitation of labor. So it's pretty high value stuff. I'm running out of time, but there are other qualities that they talk about, which are nostalgia. My parents used to live here, so I opened a shop here because I wanted to be experiencing what they experienced. And how do you survive? Oh, I have another job. So why are you doing this? Because I love to do this and I collect my stuff. So we tried to summarize this and said, these people are energetic and passionate. They are hobbyists. Some of them don't need revenue from their retail as long as they can pay the rent. They are very urbanistic. That's particularly important to me in the way they think about places. They are attached to place. They are placemakers. They are communitarian, and they are very people. They are storytellers, and many of them are romantics over being realists. Literally, that's what they are, the ones we've interviewed. They are activists, and most of all, they are optimists. They did not think this apocalypse is happening. It's like, what are you talking about? So we think about these guys as small business owners, as entrepreneurs. But what we found that aside from the entrepreneur, they were a combination of this, at least one of this, with being the entrepreneur. And that was actually really important in this story. It's a very small sample. We're going to grow this, but what I found was not what I had thought I would get. I knew that there would be some of this, but not so consistent over the businesses we surveyed. The challenges, most of them thought bricks and clicks is the way to go. Optimistic or oblivious to this. Some out of the 21, only 2 were pessimistic, and they were the hobbyist but also the oldest of the business owners. So the key to survival is kind of the same thing, but it's about knowing customers, so on and so forth. We got around to a little bit of economics. So how is this working? How do you make this happen? Landlord is a non-profit, not interested in, they just want to make sure. So a church owns this property or a non-profit owns this property, it's okay. The landlord is part of the community and he or she is as much interested in the same stuff. So this one shop said, he said to me, just show me your year-end results. If you don't make enough money, your rent will stay. But the barber's rent has gone up by $500 because he's doing really well. So there's this, sort of partnership between. The wine shop guy said, here, let me show you my store. And he walked me around the store and he said, do you think this chopped up, clunky, awkward space is of any use to Gap or Banana Republic? He says, this is the Jane Jacobs thing about this historic fabric in Cincinnati has so much of this small, awkward space that it has very low rent value, especially when Cincinnati is not particularly a place that has very high rents. So what we got out of this was that it's really not always about the bottom line, at least not for these people in this small sample. And I went back to this slide and said the actual questions should be different. It's not how do they survive, why do they survive, because that's what we got out of it, and what are the advantages to the neighborhoods and communities, rather than what is their main advantage in trying to survive. Thank you.